Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Jamie Lauren Keiles. Jamie, could you introduce yourself?
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the show. Yeah, I'm Jamie Lauren Keiles. I write for the New York Times Magazine, other places. I'm a freelance writer, and just did a story on ASMR, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, so that's the main thing we're going to talk about today. And if we have some time, we might talk about another acronym, Jewish American Princesses, also known as JAPs. But we'll see if we have time to get to that. But we're mainly talking about this piece that ran in the Times magazine recently, how ASMR became a sensation. So if someone has never heard of ASMR before, what is it?
Yeah, so it stands for Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, which doesn't really help you understand what it is. But basically, it's this feeling that people get in their body. It's a tingling sensation, and people get it in response to different stimuli. But it starts in the head, it moves down your neck, and then it spreads throughout the body. So it's kind of like chills, though you can't see any kind of like goosebumps on the skin. And people generally get it into response to like certain kinds of like semi-intimate things like maybe whispering or one of the really common ones is when people get a haircut, like when they play with your dry hair and they're like, what do you want to do today? Some people get this like euphoric all over body sensation. You almost can't describe it without doing this constantly. um, but I don't experience it, but there's been this whole online subculture that sort of discovered it and then has formed around it. So it's kind of weird writing about it without actually feeling the sensation, but it's a pretty big like online weirdo thing.
Right. Yeah, so I like the piece a lot, and I also don't experience it, much to my chagrin. And so, like, reading about it, learning more about it is, I guess, the closest I can get. So that's why I was interested in it. And it's so strange. Like, I think when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, this is just some stupid internet thing. And then it started popping up more. And then my wife got into it a little bit and was watching some of the videos, and she was feeling something, maybe not like the full the full blown thing, but it doesn't work for me. So you start the piece with an interesting bit of like recent history, which is how this um, phenomenon was named, and the person who named it, which really surprised me because it's such a strange name, and then it's not what you would expect. So how did who gave it the name ASMR?
Yeah, so there's this woman, Jennifer Allen, and she had been feeling like she'd felt ASMR her whole life, but every couple of years she'd like go online and be like tingling head and spine, like brain orgasm, like she'd be searching for all these different terms, trying to be like, what is happening to me? Like she knew it was pleasant, and I don't think she was worried like, oh, I have an illness. Like it wasn't like a WebMD situation, but she kept just going online and looking like, do other people feel this? And for years, like almost 10 years, she couldn't find anything online, and then all of a sudden one day she searches it, and like someone maybe 6 months prior had started a discussion thread on this kind of like obscure message board called Steady Health, and people there were saying like, oh my god, I feel this feeling too, I've always wondered if other people feel it. And from there kind of a little community formed around this thread, and Alan became a big part of it. And then initially in the beginning there was a lot of like, are we sex freaks, like is this a kinky thing? People were calling it like brain orgasm, and they kind of arrived on the idea like, well, it's intimate, but it's not about sex, we're not feeling horny. And Alan thought like, we need a name that sort of more seriously represents our community. And through that she was like, I'm going to come up with a really clinical sounding name. So she made up this acronym, which isn't actually like a pathological term, but it kind of sounds like one, which helps with their credibility a little,
Mm-hmm.
maybe.
That's interesting that it's like she's not a medical professional in any way or like a psychologist or anything.
No, she does like cybersecurity, I think.
Okay, so she kind of like you like made up this long like 50 letters in this the term for this phrase that has an acronym, and it was like what she thought like a medical professional would name something like this, but it's
I think
stuck.
she wasn't like she's a very smart person. I don't think she was being like, oh, like now it's a medical thing, but I think she was like really cognizant of like the way people think of pseudo-sexual phenomenons can like be really altered by the positioning. So I think she was really like made a very conscious decision to like take it out of sex weirdo world and put it into like this other kind of like pathological world.
Mhm. So you used the phrase that ASMR leapfrogged science altogether, and it kind of went from like the initial like core group of people who are interested in this, and then suddenly it went viral or something, and now it's huge. But like, there wasn't like the intermediate step of experts studying this, trying to figure out what's actually happening. So now there's like millions of people possibly watching YouTube videos of this and experiencing this thing, but it's still like entirely mysterious to science. There's like only been a couple papers published on it, and maybe since it's like not harming anyone or something, and maybe it's not going to be studied that much. So what's the state of like the understanding of what is actually happening?
Yeah, so basically, a lot of people realized they felt it, and then like maybe historically or at other points in time, like oh, you would realize there was like something about the human body that was widespread in a population, and the next step would be like let's study this, and then like because the world moves slow, it would just take some time to study it, and then eventually we'd have like an understanding of it. But now we have this whole other separate intervention, which is the internet that moves about 1 bajillion times faster than science, which is like a very slow world. So ASMR isn't like real, like it sounds like something scientists would want to research because like it's weird, but it's not really something you can get funding for. It sounds sort of crackpot. So like there's a few scientists researching it, but like they don't have a lot of funding and they don't have a ton of credibility. So it's like been very slow to get things like fMRI studies or like other types of brain imaging around helping us understand what ASMR is. Meanwhile, on the internet, there's been this huge amount of people that are like, I love feeling this pleasurable sensation. Let me just make content around it and share content around it. So like the internet, like there is a slow crawl of science, but like the internet has outpaced it at such a dramatic rate that it's like science will never catch up to what this has become.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes you think they need like like Elon Musk needs to come out as saying that he like gets ASMR and like is going to start like an institute of of study and try to figure out exactly what's going on. Or this.
It's just so hard to justify like maybe there is some potential here for like we could be using these types of videos to help people with PTSD or like people with anxiety disorders. Like it's not a totally useless sensation, but the urgency of it compared to something like I don't know, like even just anxiety generally or like cancer, like it's very hard to justify like expending resources on something that sounds so new age.
Right. But like it is happening. Like we're sure of that at this point that like this isn't. There way too many people are doing this for it to be like a mass delusion or something.
Yeah, and it shows up like when they do fMRI images, and they actually so Gibi is like the main ASMR YouTuber that I profiled in the story, and her videos were used in this study at the University of Sheffield. I think that's how you say it, Sheffield,
Mm-hmm.
where they put people in an fMRI machine, and they watched her videos, and like you can see the activity of the tingles in the brain. It lights up the kind of like I forget. There's this like part of the brain that lights up when you do like grooming tasks or like social bonding behaviors, and like they can see that it's a real thing happening in the brain. It's not something like I don't know if you know about like Morgellons where like people think they have fibers on their skin, but it's like fake. It's psychosomatic.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a psychosomatic condition. It's a real thing people are feeling. We don't know why only some people feel it, but we can observe it using like brain imaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of a scientist who is studying this that you interview has like a possible evolutionary psychology explanation to this of like the whispering and grooming, and it's kind of like a nurturing atmosphere. It all seems like something that a mother would do to a baby, and so but it's unclear why this would only apply to some people and not others. Yeah, does that explanation make sense to you?
I mean, I'm always like, I hear the phrase evolutionary biology and I just immediately feel skeptical, but like, I do, it would make sense that like there would be something in our body that like rewards us for like having non-sexual intimacy with other people. And I think that does already exist in the sense that like it feels good to hang out with people sometimes. Like, if humans are social people, it totally makes sense that this could be like something related to our survival. Um, I think we don't really understand the mechanism of ASMR well enough to like think about it beyond that. Like back to the question of like who like if everyone can't feel it, like why would this be evolutionary biology? But like I think after doing this story, and this is totally I'm not a scientist, I'm just like some idiot that writes articles, but like I'm not a person that's like super like able to access my feelings in deep ways. Like I think there is a personality component to this, and I do wonder like maybe everyone can feel ASMR. There are just certain people that are sort of like have a relationship to their feelings where like they maybe can't access a tingling brain orgasm as much as like someone who's a little more open. It does seem there is some personality type similarities among the people who like can really feel this. Like I'm very type A, kind of neurotic. Like I don't know if I was maybe with like 20 more years of therapy I'll really be able to feel it, but I don't think I'm there yet.
That's interesting. Okay, so when you're like a fully self-actualized person, then you can hear ASMR and like you're in touch with your emotions, and it's the way to
People
prove it.
like open to kind of weird like parasocial experiences like I went for this story and I had like a live ASMR session where this woman like painted my face with like a dry paintbrush and she like touched my ears very gently and rubbed oil on my wrists and like just being the person I am, I think my first response was to be like anxious or like overly courteous. Whereas I think there are some people that are like, oh, I'm having a weird experience. I'll just go with the flow. And I think when you have that barrier down, it might be that kind of person that can like let ASMR happen. Whereas I'm fighting it at every turn, being like, I don't want to be weird. Like,
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. The experience you describe of the live ASMR thing is I would not want to undergo that experience of like having a Q-tip gently rubbed against your earlobe and other unusual things. I wonder if I mean just okay. So we're saying that the thing about the babies, who knows, makes kind of sense, but no evidence. But like, I wonder if that's true, then like, is every baby able to feel this when they're a baby, and then that's why they can be calmed when you like rock them and hold them tight, and then they get they get pacified, and then it like kind of fades away for some people. That's speculation. There's no
yeah,
evidence
I
behind
guess
it.
the fun thing about this is sort of like, well, like any speculation is almost as meaningful as any because we don't know. So like that sounds like a good theory. Like if you have like $100,000, maybe you could test it, but like no
Right,
one does.
right. Okay, so one thing that I didn't even realize, even though I'd known a little bit about this, is that um, it can be a purely visual. The triggers can be purely visual. Is that right? So, like, you start off the woman you described in the beginning who named it ASMR. She noticed it when she was watching like videos or like a computer animation of from outer space of like the globe receding,
Yeah.
and whereas I thought it was like purely a sound based thing, and there's all these different tapping on things like cutting soap, like eating crunchy things, and these are various possible triggers. But just like looking alone is enough to trigger it.
And I don't think this is even like the most common triggers are generally sounds like whispering, but it's definitely not like a sound based phenomenon. And even Jennifer Allen, and this isn't even in the story, but like she says like after having experienced it so many times, she can kind of like think certain kinds of thoughts about like safety and security and incite the feeling without any kind of external stimuli. And there are some people like that.
That's interesting.
It has more to do with like creating a certain kind of experience of like maybe safety or intimacy or like I mean sometimes it's not even about that because like carving soap isn't intimate but like it's a lot about like rituals and like comfort so like I think you can do it through like I'm sure there's like physical sensations people can get it from. It's not just sound.
Yeah, I don't know, the sound. I mean, it's somehow like the sound thing. I mean, I think did this come from South Park or something? There's like this internet meme about like the brown sound. It's like a sound you play and like
That's
everyone poops.
yeah,
That's like
yeah.
a old dirty joke. And then it somehow seems like you can infect someone with sound in a way, whereas like just looking at something, I don't know. I guess well, there's like hypnotizing and like a spinning something or other, or like a snake charmer kind of thing. I guess there's various ways you can be
The sound
induced.
does seem like more invasive in some way or like I think like there's something really appealing symbolically about like frequencies. Like people love like the idea that like frequencies can heal things. Or like,
Right.
do you ever come across like binaural beats? I think it's called. It's like
No.
it's these certain frequencies of music. They're like sort of techno-ish pulses. People listen to them to fall asleep because they're supposed to put the brain in this certain like state. So like I do think like because sound enters our body in like a little bit more of a tactile way, people think of it as something that can be like healing, whereas sight, I guess it enters our body like I don't quite know how our eyes work, but like sound is like a literal vibration. So I think people want to believe that it's like really powerful.
Yeah, it does seem like it's obviously like the physics of it are different. Like sound is a wave, light is a photons are both uh,
Right.
atoms and waves or whatever. Sorry, to all my physics teacher in high school, but yeah, and it does seem like metaphorically different somehow. So a lot of the people, maybe most of them or almost all of them, of the people who are creating these videos are women.
Hmm.
And well, is there an explanation for that, or is that just a coincidence?
I mean, I think there's a couple explanations. The one I like the best is like, okay, if this is a feeling that we get surrounding like intimacy and safety, like even if this is a physiological sensation, like those things too are like socially constructed in some ways, and like we live in a society, and the society is one where like women do most of like the caring roles, whether it's like mothering, being your girlfriend, being your waitress, like cutting your hair, like a lot of these sort of like intimate caring roles are done by women. So I
Right.
do think just generally when we're looking for that kind of response, whether you're straight or gay or male or female, I think we do tend to look towards women for those things. And I think maybe after like another millennium of gender parity or whatever you want to call it, like then maybe we'll have male ASMR people. But like I don't think we expect the same kind of caring from men. There are male ASMR artists. Most of them are gay men, which I think sort of fits into my theory of
Hmm.
like they're also hairdressers. We also think of them stereotypically as like more caring people in society. Like that's not objectively true, but it does sort of play out in our history, so it would sort of inform how we take in that information.
Right. And one of the one of the videos you linked to, which went viral a couple months ago, is like a woman pretending to be like a nurse in the Middle Ages, caring for someone dying of plague or something along those lines. And so she's
Yeah.
wearing a costume, and so that's very odd. But that's also like if the nurses are like coded female, and I don't get exactly why someone would want to like imagine themselves dying of plague. But
I think helplessness is like kind of part of it. Like I don't think people want to imagine themselves dying, but like there is something like when you're like a little girl, like and you go to like sleepover parties, like there is something really fun. Like people play these games where it's like there's an egg on your head, and like this like thing where you're totally at the whim of someone else's like care or like touching you, and they're like someone scratching your back, like to be so powerless in that way and to feel so cared for. I think like situations of helplessness are really appealing in the ASMR fantasy because it's like you're a baby and you're being cared for, and like that's not a thing you get to experience very often in adulthood, and maybe only in clinical settings where you're like physically incapacitated.
right, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so then the question of like how close is this to sex and pornography or sex work comes in. And a couple like 6 months ago I saw something that Patreon had kicked a couple ASMR women off because they like classified them as doing sex work, which isn't allowed on Patreon, but they said they were just doing ASMR things. um, but yeah, so the line is kind of, and they like, you note that the people called this like a brain gasm, informally, when they were trying to figure out what was going on. So it is like um, sex adjacent, or how would you characterize it?
Yeah, so I think like one of the problems in talking about this, and I get into it in the story a little bit, but it's like as Americans, like we don't really have very good language for talking about sex. Like we have the language for talking about like sex when you're having it, and we have language talking about sex when you're not having it, but like all the various gray areas in between it, whether it's like really, really close friendship or it's like sexual harassment, like all these other things that maybe invoke sex or involve sex or look towards sex, whether it's consensual or not consensual, like we don't have good words for talking about like intermediary things. So this is like an especially weird scenario because it's like this isn't sex and it's not sexual, but it does deal with like intimacy, which is a part of sex, like hopefully if you're having good sex. So like we just don't have language for that as like Americans. Like we're very repressed, so it's like very weird to be like, oh, you can have something that's intimate and it's supposed to make you feel good and relaxed, and like maybe it involves women, but it's not supposed to give you a boner. Like we don't really have a word for that.
Mhm.
So like I do think like there's ASMR doesn't have to be about sex, but the idea that you'd want to feel like relaxed and comfortable, that is something that like ideally you want to have with your sexual partners. I think like when you're in a relationship and you love someone and they play with your hair, like that's not sex, but it is like intimate.
Right. And so this is like unless you do the in-person one, it's like a simulacrum or whatever of intimacy. And like they're usually talking directly to the camera, and in the case of like, I assume like they're the plague plague nurse one and others, it's like they're looking at you and talking to you as though you were actually right there with them. Um, so yeah, so and then it's so you mentioned this young woman. Is it Gibi? Is that how you pronounce
GB.
it? Gibi,
Yeah.
who's like the one of the top ASMR performers or artists. Do they call themselves artists?
ASMRtists is
I
one
see.
word, and then just like creators is fine, like ASMR creators. I think
Yeah.
that's like the YouTube branded term for them.
Right. And so she is making a living off of this through ads. And actually, a question like, um, if you really want to be relaxed and you go to your favorite ASMR, and then there's like a loud ad for Reebok shoes or something, you know, for the first 30 seconds, that seems bad. So how do they? Is it like in? Is it like on a podcast where they read out the ad or something, or how do they
So
monetize?
it's both. A big complaint that you see on in the comments on ASMR videos is like people will be like, oh, I was like watching video after video of relaxing noise, and then all of a sudden there was like this jarring ad for like whatever. Like definitely the ads are just pretty random, and like you can't click like only give me quiet relaxing ads. So like that is a problem with the platform itself. The creators do like sponsored content deals where they'll like a really funny one that was happening was I think KFC sent buckets of fried chicken to people, and because it's so crispy, it was like crunch, crunch. But then there's this whole nother conversation that's happening because it's like when you're in this sort of like relaxed, susceptible state, do you really want someone to be like, buy Crest toothpaste or like whatever? Like,
That's like the classic,
sort of like, it's
subliminal
like,
marketing thing or whatever.
yeah, it seems very like, do you ever see Josie and the Pussycats?
I was just tweeting about that this very day, in
That's so
fact.
funny.
It's
Yeah,
such a
they
great
like,
movie.
they put the ads in the songs, and I'm always like, if you're like just on the verge of falling asleep and like the ASMR person is whispering like buy Monsanto vegetables, like that just seems so dicey. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, they're making tons. Like she's making tons of money. She is very GB's very strategic about which ads she accepts. Like she tries to do only ads for like products that she thinks would actually be of use in some way to her clients. So she's not selling like diet teas. She's mostly selling like lay flat headphones that you can like lay on your side wearing, like sort
Mm.
of these like things that appeal to like people that love relaxing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, and but the I mean the strange thing about the way you have to talk to her is that she has some number of like obsessive fans because it seems like some people maybe are like paranoid schizophrenic or something, and others are like feel just like fall in love with her and want to know everything about her. So you don't say where she lives or her last name, and so it's it's weird that she's kind of broadcasting from an undisclosed location, and but has all the has millions of followers, but people don't she doesn't say anything about her real life because there's some psychos out there. So that's just a new, I guess, kind of the new reality of like being popular on YouTube
Yeah.
is that there are some crazy people out there who might become obsessed with you, and you don't like have the you can't like hire like a 24-hour bodyguards or something like that like a celebrity would do.
Yeah, I think it's like weird because it's like, well, there's the condition of being famous on the internet in the first place, and then there's also just being a woman on the internet and in the world. And so on top of that, to be one that's like actively courting like this image of intimacy, like there's just crazies out there, and I think people, even non-crazy people, are like, I listen to this woman every single night when I'm falling asleep, and she like makes me feel good and happy. Like I could see why that would be hard for someone who's going through like a really rough time of their life, maybe, and like is really reliant on these videos to feel good. Um, but I think this just maybe speaks to like larger needs about like working conditions for YouTubers, because like it sounds funny to be like, oh, we need to like have better working conditions for people that post online, but like whether we like it or not, it like is the way that like a lot of people make a living now. And it does seem like if we're going to keep having this kind of entertainment, like we do have protections for people who make other forms of entertainment. So like you would, I guess at some point in the future, we're going to need like unions and all kinds of other stuff for like internet creators, which is definitely a thing I'm interested in. But right now it's like a wild, wild west, and people are making all these crazy forms, and there's like people out there stalking them. So it's just like very weird and dark to me.
Yeah, it is like the gold rush days. It was of like
Yeah.
a lawless realm, and yeah, I would welcome a. I mean, this video is going to appear on YouTube, so I would welcome a YouTube content creator union, and if I could get into it, and if they offered health insurance, that'd be nice as well. Um, So okay, so I mean, part of this, and I think this was you delve into this in the piece, is that like there's a lot of lonely people out there, and beyond just the fact that this makes like a pleasant sensation in their brains that they can feel and other people can't feel, it's like someone is like whispering to them for half an hour, and it seems like they're talking just to them, and um, and giving them like in this conversation we're having, like I see your image in my Skype window and I'm talking to you, but then in the like videos I've watched, it seems like the creator is staring directly in the camera, and if you're just sitting there looking at it, it seems like they're talking right to you. And
Right.
like
It's like,
how often,
oh, thank you for having me on this show. Like,
yeah, it's like how often, unless like you're in an like a intense relationship with another person, like how often is there someone paying like direct attention to you for 30 minutes uninterrupted? They might give an ad every 10 minutes or
right.
so, but that that's unusual, not even at this moment in history, but I think probably most, to have like undivided be undivided attention being given to you. And yeah, so the internet has atomized us in a lot of ways, but this is like a weird way that people who are lonely and looking for some sort of human connection can like get it.
Yeah, and I think it's like, I mean, I have two thoughts on that, which is one, like, of course, now I just immediately forget the thought. What thing is, like, there, like, oh, what was I gonna say?
I don't know. We can we can move on if you
Oh, I
can't
remember
remember.
what I was gonna say. So, like, like, it's easy to like look at that and be like, oh, look at these suckers, like really getting drawn in by these like women who make these videos on the internet. Like that could never happen to me. But like, I just like speak like I'm like a relatively well-adjusted person, and like I go on social media every day, and like I don't think it's the kind of thing that happens once where it's like you watch the video and you're drawn in. It's more like, oh, like over time, it's like there's people I follow on Instagram for years that I've never met, but like I feel like I know them in some kind of way. So like there are these kinds of relationships that are facilitated by the internet. And then I think there's this whole other thing that's going on, which is just like when you when you're a lonely person, like it's hard to go out in the world and be social, but like overcoming those difficulties makes the payoff have like a contextual meaning. Like it's like, well, I overcame my anxiety and now it's like I met someone, and like through that period of strife I've had some moment of growth. Where like when you can circumvent that whole process and just be like, I'm gonna watch a video, I think that is a little weird because it like delivers all the payoffs of socializing without making you do any of the hard work that makes socializing like meaningful or contextual. So like while people might be getting the good feelings of like watching ASMR or feeling less lonely, I don't know if it's a sustainable improvement in their life, because it's not like they're like building networks or relationships that will support them over time. It's very much, I mean, I guess it's a little bit the same with porn, where like it feels good to jerk off to porn, but that doesn't mean that you're like meeting someone that's gonna like be there for you in any kind of way. So I'm not saying in like a pearl clutching way like, oh, ASMR is bad, but I do think it's like it's not gonna solve the problem of loneliness. It's more of like uh, an intervention that can be maybe good with other types of help for lonely people. Like porn isn't going to fix the problem of your sex life. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't watch porn. I mean, I don't feel like it does.
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat reminiscent of like the like idea. I guess it must have originated when television first came around, that like there'd be something like so entertaining that it would take over your life, and this is like
Right.
kind of the
The boob tube.
yeah. So you get like sucked in, and so it's a little bit like, I don't know, like the Matrix, or like the book Infinite Jest. It's like, so, the fear of like something so great that you're like in the illusion, and like actual reality, you ignore it. So it doesn't that's like, this is not that, but it is, I don't know, it is more like that than just like watching like movie trailers or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's funny because like I thought about Infinite Jest a lot when I was working on this story, because like the the issue that's portrayed in that is like someone puts in this tape and they're like put into essentially a coma. This in some ways is like almost feels a little more sinister, because it's like it's delivering the same kind of like intense pleasure, but it makes it seem like it's something that can like, oh, it's not a big deal, just these videos you watch, you're still lucid. It's like I think this a sort of insidious thing about like the way the internet really affects our daily functioning is like we've integrate it into our reality in a way that's like it's normalized and natural, that it's not like it's a person sitting alone in a closet drooling. It's like people are like constantly tapping into this sorts of pleasure in the midst of their daily routines, and like now we've created it to the point where it's like you can't opt out of it. Like you need to be checking your email. You sort of, in some fields, need to be on social media. And like, I don't mean to be like, oh, it's dystopian, but like the worst dystopian fantasies we had 20 years ago, this is almost like it seems more normal, and yet its effect on our life is greater. So that does freak me out, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I get okay. So, final question, maybe on this topic. Have any like corporations tried to start like making like the super ASMR that like is addictive and you need to watch the full hour kind of thing, or is it all still this like hobbyist like random people around the world doing it?
Yeah, so it's more like random people are making it now, and then corporations are using it in like advertising. Like there was a Super Bowl ad this year with like the actress Zoe Kravitz, and it was like her opening a Michelob Ultra and like drinking it, and like people are using ASMR in advertising, but I think more in the way like, oh, it's a trend and people love advertisements that are trendy. I don't think people are trying to use it like as subliminal messaging, and I don't think even like there are some YouTube artists that are making like 45-minute long ASMR videos with like really high production value, but I don't think it's quite at the level where like we don't even understand what it does well enough to exploit it for evil. When it crosses over into evil, it's almost accidentally because it's like, oh, these creators want to make money, so they're going to sell ads against it. But yeah, I don't know if we'll see it get to a point where like people are doing mind control. Like I don't know if we need to. I mean, I think we're also willing to like go online and subject ourselves to like advertising all day. We don't really need mind control. Like I just do it for free all day.
Right, right. I mean, okay, I said this was the last question, but maybe one more. I mean, could there be like, will someone someday make like an ASMR movie that like people go to in the theater and they watch and feel good, like surrounded by other people?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's funny because the most popular ASMR videos don't really have narrative through lines. They're literally just people like picking something up and like tapping on it and then like patting it. So something you need to like look at something for like an hour and stay awake is like some type of narrative investment. So I feel like these videos work better shorter because the ones where the artists try to do narratives, a lot of times the fans complain and they're like, "Can you just tap on this cup instead?" Like I think like Gibi, when I was talking to her, because she's like a former theater kid, and she was saying like, I love theater, I love writing like little sketches, and like I put a lot of work into these sketches, and like some of my fans like them, but for the most part, they're like, all right, we'll let you indulge your thing, but as long as you include like 35 minutes of tapping on a cup in the midst of it, like, so I don't know if it's gonna be adapted to the screen, like, it would be pretty weird. I mean, it's weird already as is.
Yeah, maybe like an art school, like film school student or
Yeah.
something. We'll try it. I'm just imagining like the old like thing of like a woman is performing like like a singing in a bar or something, and like the rowdy patrons are like shouting like show us your tits or something,
Right.
and then this version is like tap on the cup, tap on the cup.
There is
That's what the people want these days. Just tap on a cup.
there is something. Well, there are two things. Like, Whisper Lodge is this art installation that travels around, and it's a live ASMR show. So like you can go. It's almost like an escape room, but for like relaxation. Like there's like an immersive environment, and like you encounter like ASMR experiences along the way. So there are ways of like adapting this into more substantial forms of entertainment. But like I don't know if it's going to be something as simple as like a movie or just like a hot lady tapping a cup. And then the other thought about that is a lot of people are interested in seeing like could this be integrated into like the spa space, because like we already pay people to rub our bodies and like put weird creams on our face. So like when you abstract like a massage or a facial, that seems really weird. So it kind of makes sense that like ASMR as a relaxing experience could fit in there. We just like when I tell people I went to this woman who like did all these bizarre interventions to me, everyone's like, that's so strange. But like it's not really any weirder than like a facial or a massage, which is also just like a bunch of random discrete movements that we've like packaged as a massage. So
Yeah.
I think that's the future of it. Like I really enjoyed my one-on-one ASMR session, like more than I expected to, and I would maybe pay money for it again, even though I didn't feel ASMR.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also wondering if could there be like a touring show of like a single person performer on stage and
Yeah,
in an auditorium, and they're tapping the cup or whatever. But maybe it is like this. It's hard to feel intimacy surrounded by like 5,000 other people. So maybe that wouldn't work.
but like my mom and dad went to Amsterdam once, and they told me they went to a live sex show, and they were like, we got there, and it was like tour buses full of other tourists, and like it was the least sexy thing. Like you'd much rather just go watch porn at your house. So I think it's kind of the same scenario where it's like if you want to have like a vulnerable, intimate experience, you probably don't want to do it in an audience. Or like that's really like the challenge of theater is like how do you make people do that collectively? And I
Mhm.
don't know if ASMR is going to be like the answer.
Okay, so let's end ASMR chat there and talk for a minute
Okay.
about a piece that you published last year that I remember reading at the time and and finding interesting and enjoying it, hitting on some parts of my own biography. So it was in Vox. The headline is "Reconsidering the Jewish American Princess: How the Jap Became America's Most Complex Jewish Stereotype." Um, and it's a combination kind of biographical piece or memoirish piece and historical cultural analysis of the Jewish American princess or Jap, which is not related to the anti-Japanese slur from the 1940s or whatever, but was a word that was said very often in my like middle school years growing up in suburban New Jersey. So
Where
what
in Jersey are you from?
South Orange in Essex County?
Oh, okay, so yeah, you're in the midst of it.
Yes, exactly. The Jap belt, maybe some would put it. But um, okay, so how did you decide that you wanted to write about Jewish American princesses and also to make it like a personal essay?
So it started like I was trying to read this article. Like I was just like very curious about like how did this stereotype come to be and like has it changed over time? And I kept looking like what is available to read on this. And like there were a lot of people feeling angry about the term or offended by it. But and there were some like academic papers from like people's undergrad thesis or whatever, like a little bit exploring the history, but there wasn't really like a thing that really brought all of the stuff together and had any kind of like substantial analysis. So as I started looking for something to read, I was like, oh, I guess I just have to be the one to write this if I want it to exist in the world. Um, and then it wasn't initially a personal essay at all. I actually started working on it and doing the research. I was reading like a lot of Philip Roth, looking into like some different, I don't know, like historical depictions of like Jewish women, because I grew up Reform and like I'm maybe more religious now than I was then, but like I wouldn't say like, I didn't grow up in a Jewish area, so like I don't have a lot of just like implicit knowledge of Jewish things. Like I've kind of encountered them randomly in adulthood. So as I was doing this research, I was getting very interested in it, but it felt like it was just a lot of ground to cover and I was reading like histories of anti-Semitism and Jewish stereotypes and like it just kind of got too big and I set it aside for a while because I was like I don't know how to make this into like a story. And then I moved from LA back to New York and I was thinking a lot about Jewish identity again. And I started being like, oh yeah, I really do want to read more about the Jap thing. And like the fact that I didn't grow up in a Jappy place, but then went to a Jappy camp started to like kind of inform the way I was thinking about the story. And I was like, maybe that needs to go in the story. And like, I don't love writing about myself for its own sake, but my editor was like, I think we really need some like context here, especially for people who aren't Jews and like aren't going to know where this is coming from. So it sort of became a personal essay in the editing process, and my editor, Julia Rubin at Vox, just kept being like, put more stuff about your life in here, put more stuff about your life in here, which I think actually was like good advice, but like it was not the piece I set out to write. But I'm happy it turned out that way because it otherwise would have just been like a lot of dry information about like, I don't know, like calling Jews like Shylocks or whatever.
Yeah, well, I recommend people read the piece, whatever their previous encounters with the term "chap." Um, and yeah, you give a lot. You talk about like your grandparents and their family histories, and your parents and your childhood. So okay, so the term, I guess, so it like originates after World War II as Jews started entering like the middle and upper middle class, and
Yes, the type of like the behavior of Jap was around before the term itself. Like you start seeing depictions of like Jappy kind of people, and like the first book is really Marjorie Morningstar. I forget who the author is. And the second one,
Herman Wouk, right, who
yeah,
just died like a week or
yeah,
two
yeah.
ago.
And then in Goodbye Columbus, the Philip Roth book, it comes up, and you like see depictions of these kind of like overachieving but like high maintenance, upper middle class Jewish people that are like created from like the upward mobility after the Second World War and like sort of the success of like Jewish assimilation. But you don't really see the term Jap start coming about until like the 70s. And it's not really clear like when it was first used, but like first it's called Jewish princess, then it's called Jewish American princess. And I don't really know when it got shortened to Jap, but like I think it was sort of after. I mean, it was like the term Jap for Jews was coming up on the East Coast as it was descending for Japanese people on the West Coast. So
Mm-hmm.
these two terminologies with the same word kind of like cross paths in history. And then at some point, I think on the East Coast, Jewish American princess is dominant. But if you talk to people on the West Coast, depending on where they live, like the term for Japanese people is still very much a slur in places where there's a lot of Japanese people. So it's kind of a weird, very American thing.
Yeah, I definitely knew it in the Jewish sense as a kid before I heard it.
Yes,
I
same.
heard that it was also used as a slur for Japanese people. So yeah, so there's like literary precedents. So I think I actually have mentioned this on the show before because I did an episode after Philip Roth died. But I'm like a Roth super fan, or at least was like as a decade ago, and read all of his novels. And so I grew up in South Orange, which borders Newark, and Goodbye Columbus, the novella in his first book. He the main character Neil Klugman, right? Travels from Newark up up the hills and to go visit Brenda Potemkin. And supposedly, an adult told me this when I was young, that the actual woman who this character was based on lived in South Orange, the town where I grew up in, and in the like super wealthy neighborhood that's called Newstead, but was also called Jewstead in my childhood because a lot of Jewish people lived there. So anyway, so yeah, so and Roth has often been criticized for his depiction of women, especially Jewish women, and I guess most famously the mother in Portnoy's Complaint. But Brenda Potemkin is kind of like the I don't think she's exactly the archetype for what the stereotype came to be, but because I don't know, it's been a long time since I read it, but like her family's wealthy and they have this fridge in the basement with fresh fruit like overflowing from it, and she's had a nose job, and the as I recall, the family's wealth is kind of like the father like had owned a company that made like toilets or something and they got the army contract, so they became millionaires through plumbing fixtures and stuff like that. So they're like kind of nouveau riche, but she's not. I don't know. There's kind of in the Jap as it came to in my childhood, there was almost like a vulgarity to the stereotype, whereas it seemed like back in the 50s or whatever, it was more like this is like a Jewish woman who like wants to seem like just like the proper kind of like waspy woman.
Yeah, I think it started off as like it's someone who's like almost they've so successfully assimilated that they've over assimilated, and it's like become this caricature of like middle class sort of comfort, where it's like, oh, they have all the things, and like they have the fridge, they have the air conditioning, they have wall to wall carpeting, like all these kind of trappings of like the 60s that like showed like, look, Jews, we're normal, we're normal, we're normal, but like it's becoming so normal that you're almost ridiculous looking. Whereas then I think as the term kind of caught on, it seems like it became a slur Jews use against other Jews to kind of police like that exact same thing, where it's like, oh, like you're embarrassing us because like now that all the Jews, like it's sort of like now that all the Jews are white, you don't need to go so far and being like making such a mockery of ourselves. Like we can just be normal white people in America. Whereas I think in the beginning it was like so novel, the idea that like a Jew would be like an assimilated white person and not like an ethnic minority. So I think as the Jews became more white, the idea that like you could be like transgressing normalcy became something that we like police a little more. Whereas in the 60s, I think it was just such a weird novelty to be like, oh, we're like not shtetl weirdos. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, and in the nose job is like the symbol of that in the um in uh in the Roth that it's like daddy's money bought the thing that made her look like a Gentile instead of looking like a Jew. So you give like so then it also became associated like a lot with like acquisitiveness and especially like luxury brands and so there was like there was this famous thing called the Preppy Handbook that came out in like the early 80s. So then there was a parody of it called the Jap Handbook, and it listed like all the brands that you needed to have if you wanted to be a true Jap, and I guess like tongue in cheek since it was like a kind of a parody of a parody. But so in like my childhood, it was which was like late 80s, early 90s. It was probably mostly synonymous with like spoiled brat kind of thing, and like daddy's money. She gets what she wants. She's kind of like socially she's high on the pecking order, and But like she's really just a bitch at heart. That was probably how we thought. When I was 13 years old, that was probably what I thought when I called someone Jap. So what did it mean when you heard it as a kid?
So I'm a little bit younger than you, and I think my peak Jap phase was like maybe it be the era that I'm thinking of it like maybe begins with the Spice Girls and it ends with like Juicy Couture, the sweatsuit company going out of business. So like I do think like in the late 90s, early thousands, Jap kind of was like inflected with this weird girl power thing where it's like she's a bitch, but like being a bitch was kind of a cool thing at that point where it
Mm-hmm.
was like girl power, I get what I want, but it was still like I think because I was a child, like to be like I get what I want, it's not the same as being like I make my own money and I buy what I want. You're still like I get what I want from my dad. So like
Right.
it's the same thing that they were talking about in the 70s and the 80s, but I think because of like the weird feminisms of like the early 90s, it became this thing where it's like I'm proud to be a spoiled brat, but it like really was the same thing, but it was like had new language for it or something. But I don't think it was as much of a slur in the time. I think it was like a little bit aspirational to be like, I want to be a Jappy girl. Like, I want to be like a high maintenance popular girl that tells people what to do and like has the coolest clothes and is like kind of not afraid to speak their mind, even if it's like in this kind of like annoying way. Like, it's still a judgment you make against someone, but like, I think it's more of a description of a particular type of person at that point than it is to be like, oh, get these fucking Japs out of my bat mitzvah. Like,
All these Japs are ruining my bat mitzvah, and then the increasing importance culturally of bar and bat mitzvahs is like goes along with this, I guess. And like my mother was not bat mitzvahed, and it would have been 1963, and because that just they only had bar mitzvahs, they didn't do bat mitzvahs. And yeah, so then so if you're rich, it becomes this crazy, crazy event. So Juicy Couture, let's talk about that just for a moment. So I think I was a little too old to like have peers that were super into that, but I didn't know that it was created by two Jewish women, and also
yeah.
that like Juicy, like the word Jew is kind of in there, and that it was like a totemic item for young Jewish women.
Yeah, like I don't think like I remember they had one shirt that said "Juicy American Princess," so like obviously like they were very aware of like who their market was, but like the market for Juicy Couture products also like it was just anyone that kind of wanted to like project that like Jappy bad bitch persona. So like lots of celebrities wore those sweatsuits at the time, and I think it
Like
like
Paris Hilton, would
yeah
have them, right?
yeah. So I think it's like whereas like the embarrassment of being a Jap in like maybe the 70s and the 80s was like the excess of it. I think by the time that Juicy Couture came around, it was very much like, oh, we love excess. Like we're driving Hummers. It's 2004. Like bling bling. Like people
Yeah.
saying like all these sort of like corny like white people saying like rap aphorisms all of a sudden. Like it was just a very peculiar time where like the over excess of like being a Jap was like something that mainstream culture was really ready for. Uh, we like had these couple years where it was like that was just the cool way to look and to dress. And like, I mean, Japs are like always underdressed in kind of like an overdressed way. And I think that was really how people dressed in the thousands, where they wanted to wear like slob clothes with like jewelry, which is kind of like a classic Jap way to be, like a slouchy sweater with like a tennis bracelet or something. So yeah, it was like, I feel sort of privileged to be alive in this like very particular moment where like this very particular kind of Jewish identity was like circulating in the mainstream. And I think a lot about it now, like as like an American Jew with like a lot of negative feelings about Israel, I'm always looking like what are touchstones of like Jewish American identity that really are like distinctly American. And I think the Jap is one of those things. Like I'm sure there's Japs in Canada and there's Japs in Australia, but like it really is like a product of like Jewish American assimilation and like Jews integrating into like American pop culture. And I think like even though it's sort of an ugly stereotype of women, it is something that we have as like American Jews that's like so distinctly American and so detached from like any kind of like Israel-centric discourse that I feel like there's like a real potential here for like people of my generation to like band together as American Jews like around this very weird artifact. And I think that's maybe why I'm so drawn to it, is because it's like it's political, but in a way that's not about like Zionism.
Okay, that's interesting. So you want to kind of like take it back, essentially. Like it was a slur, but you want to like celebrate what it stands for.
I don't know if I want to celebrate what it stands for, but I think I just feel drawn to it because it's like doing this thing that not a lot of other elements of Jewish identity are doing right now. Like something I think about a lot is like sort of like Jewish commies in Hollywood in like the Blacklist era or like McCarthyism. Like I feel very drawn to that right now where I'm like, oh, like this is like a thing that happened in like Jewish American history that's like all about being Jewish and an American and like fitting into American culture, and like something about that's very interesting to me, if not like it was a sort of bad, weird time, but also it was like a particular kind of Jew that came out of that moment, and I feel that way a lot about like Japiness because it's like it's just such a distinctly American Jewish way of being, and we have so few of those things, and it sort of inspires me to think like, what can a Jew be in our current moment? Like, what should Jews be doing? It's like I don't know. I feel very excited about like Jewish American identity as a distinct identity from just like global Jewishness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you said, like as I think, like the majority of younger American Jews are like don't feel the strong connection to Israel that our parents did, and or at least are willing to view it a lot more critically. So is there like is there a Jewish American prince? Like, is that a thing? Or I was trying to think like what is the corresponding male stereotype, and I guess it's like in one way the Jewish American princess like wants to marry like the Harvard, the doctor from Harvard Medical School. Like that's the stereotype. So then, and it would be a Shonda if she married a goy. So she has to marry a nice Jewish boy. So yeah, so it's like the nice Jewish boy or the mensch is kind of like the corresponding stereotype, or there's like the nebbish, like the Woody Allenish kind of like nebbish, like weakling Jewish character. But neither of those have to do with like consumerism. Really, it's more like just be a good boy and study hard and make some money and have some kids. So yeah, what do you think? There's what do we say about the Jewish American princes?
Yeah, I mean, I think like stereotypes of men are always just sort of like we have a lot more mean things to say about women as a culture than we do about men. But like I do think there is a Jewish American prince, or at least like I've definitely met them. Like I feel like I've had like cousins and relatives and even like some of my brother's friends that are like, I don't know, it's like they get into one thing and then all of a sudden it's like the overbearing women in the family, like just to pick up on another Jewish stereotype, but like they're like, you like Nike sneakers? Like we're gonna get you every kind of Nike sneakers, and like there's these certain type of socks you like I'm gonna buy you all these socks or whatever. Like I think like I there are like consumerist rituals around like Jewish American manhood that exist. I think they have less of like a judgmental connotation because like we just at this point expect Jewish men to be wealthy and successful. So it's not like, oh, you need to leech off daddy's money. I think it's more, it's like, oh, well, there's a certain way we're used to living. And like, because like the women of our culture, we think of them as a certain overbearing way, we will make sure that the men are like decked out in the correct clothes or whatever. But I don't think it's like as harmful as a stereotype.
Yeah, because it's the Jap is like grasping, and all she cares about is money and luxury products or whatever.
Or she needs a man, like she needs like a dad or a husband. Whereas a Jewish American prince like benefits from sort of the like doting of like the overbearing Jewish American mother, but ultimately he's not looking for like a meal ticket. He can just like go get a career.
Right. Well, you know what? Maybe we need a Jewish American queen. No longer a princess, becoming a queen. Maybe we need that modeled for us in the culture. I'm trying to think who are Jewish American queens. Like maybe Amy Schumer. Although I don't know if she married a Jewish man.
Jewish?
Yeah, she's Jewish.
Oh, I don't think I even knew. She's so blonde.
She is related to Chuck Schumer. She's like Chuck Schumer's second cousin.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, I don't know if we have like, I mean, I guess we do have sort of like more serious stereotypes of Jewish women, which are like maybe Ruth Bader Ginsburg or something, but like that almost like, I think if it was like the 50s, someone would probably call her a Jap, like this very like striving, overachieving kind of like upwardly mobile Jewish woman. Like I think the Jap stereotype initially had room for those kinds of women, where now it's like definitely has more of like a vapid connotation. But like, there's like there are Jewish women everywhere now, and they come in all flavors. So like I think the Jap is just like a historical curiosity that's like still fun and interesting. I don't know if we need like new iterations of it.
Do kids still call each other at summer sleepaway camp, do they still like think of this term, or is it like passing away?
I'm not sure. Like, I definitely like I have cousins that are like 15, and I definitely like follow them on Instagram, and I look at their account, and I'm like, oh, these are the Japs of their friend group. Like, I can see who the people are, but I don't know if they use the word. Maybe that's just what they like are like now. I really don't know if the word is like still being circulated among teenagers.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, it's hard to find out exactly what contemporaneously what teenagers are really saying to each other. But
Yeah,
if I don't know, I mean it's kind of a slur. It also is the same word as an actual slur, and the
right.
kids today are more sensitive to those kind of slurs and insults than in my childhood. So maybe it's not said, even if the essential type still is out there in the wild.
Yeah, I don't know if they're actively reclaiming it, and they're definitely not really. I feel like teens today aren't loving slurs like teens once did. So like, it might just die out.
Yeah,
Who knows?
yeah.
Like, you won't find out until like the teens of now are old enough to like write about it, because like I don't know how to, like, I don't have Snapchat, like I don't know how to access that.
Yeah. You have to you would need to like go undercover or something, or like
Right.
as like an anthropologist would. Okay, I think those are all the Jap questions I have. Is there anything else you want to say about Japs before we wrap up?
No, I mean, that's I think I that's it.
Okay, so the links to the pieces we discussed that you wrote will be below this. So how can people find your content if they want to find it?
So I'm Jamie Keiles on Twitter, JAMIE KEILES, and I have a website, and I don't know, set a Google alert for me. I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, I'm online. I write for the New York Times Magazine. I write for a bunch of other places, and I don't know, like I'm on email. You can email me. Like, I'm just a person out there in the world. So
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk about these two. Not, I guess they're not really related subjects, but I guess women, the predominance of women is possibly the link. But thank you for coming on. And thank you to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.
yeah, thanks everyone.